Hi everyone, it's Sophie, Savitri and Millie here from National Teen Book Club. Thank you so much for joining us today for this broadcast. Our author Q&A will last around 45 minutes. We'll start with a quick introduction to our guest speaker and then move on to our questions and discussion.
So joining us today is Elle McKinney. That's her publishing name, but she also goes by Leatrice or Elle. Named one of the Roots 100 Most Influential African Americans and BET's 100 Entertainers and Innovators of the Year, Elle is an advocate for equality and inclusion in publishing and the creator of the hashtags #PublishingPaidMe and #WhatWomenOfColorWritersHere, women of WOC is women of colour. A lover of comics, anime, video games, sci-fi and fantasy, she strives to push these mediums towards representation that better reflects the diverse world we live in. Elle is streaming in all the way from Kansas City, where she lives with her 2 cats.
Yeah, very excited to be joined by Elle today. And she is joining us for the third of 6 author talks, which are linked to our hero read for the term, which is Charlotte Bronte's Gothic classic, Jane Eyre, and Patrice Lawrence's abridged retelling of the story. So like Patrice Lawrence, Elle McKinney has reimagined her own version of Jane Eyre with her book, Escape of Mr. Rochester, and she's going to tell us all about it shortly.
Yes, we're going to be speaking to Elle about her book, recommended reads and career in storytelling, and you can submit questions for her via the Q&A Slido function underneath the stream on your screen. You may have to scroll down just a little bit to see this. You can also submit questions via the QR code on screen or by typing in the code online. Q&A function will be open throughout the discussion, so you can join in at any time. And if you're experiencing any issues with the stream, please let us know there and we will try our best to support you.
Hi, Elle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get straight into the Q&A. So our first question, please will you tell us a bit more about your book, Escaping Mr. Rochester?
Right. So it's answering a question that isn't like a new question or anything that a lot of readers, including myself, has, like, what if Mr. Rochester was the villain of the story as opposed to, the romantic hero and interest? And what might that look like? And what might that look like if Bertha had more agency and Jane was a little less smitten, and how that might go down if we were to sort of deconstruct the lens through which that particular author wrote this story. So it reimagines it as Bertha being sane in her right mind and trapped in the attic, and Jane trying to figure out why Rochester is being so shady, and the two of them working together to get out of the machinations that he has set up within his home of Thornfield without giving anything away. I think that was the most spoiler-free I've managed to talk about that book before. So.
Oh, it's wonderful. And so many reasons to go back into this story and revisit, even as you've just alluded to, and this might be something we come back to, the mental health theme and how differently we would talk about that today. Before we dive into any of that, did you study Jane Eyre at school?
I did not. Jane Eyre was studied at my school by different classes, but the track that I was on, I don't remember exactly what we did instead of Jane Eyre, but I know Pride and Prejudice was in there. I remember reading Wuthering Heights, or struggling through Wuthering Heights, honestly, and perking up when we read The Hobbit. But like I said, science fiction and fantasy is my thing. So it was not assigned to my class, but I know it was one of the books assigned to the classes. They tried to give us a variety of 2 or 3. So no, I didn't study it. I read it later in life, after high school, after college, because I had been asked, would you be interested in doing a reimagining? Because I had done Alice in Wonderland. And I have a beef with the notion of what is or isn't classic literature and who gets invited and who made those rules. And so I was like, oh, let me check out, see what's going on with this one in particular. And I read it and I had a few bones to pick with what was going on in the story.
Okay, well, just to add to that, so some of the reviews of your book include McKinney breathes new life into a much-loved tale and a stunning queer black spin on a revered classic. Can you talk to us about the different interpretations of the characters in the original book by Charlotte Brontë and why you were inspired to write a retelling? You've kind of touched on it a little bit, but anything else you can add to that?
Absolutely. So I'm gonna preface this by saying that like not every book is for every person. I didn't fully vibe with Jane Eyre the way a lot of readers have. Like I've met a lot of people who are like, this is my favorite book. Um, or it used to be their favorite book and now they're, rereading it with a new lens. Um, whatever that new lens might be, experience or, outside of school. And one of several things that I took issue with the book was the portrayal of Bertha and how she was locked in the attic for being a woman disease pretty much, which hysteria and things of that nature, but there were also allusions to throughout the narrative that it had to do with her bad blood, and that was because at some point she had um black or African blood in her somewhere, and so that was a poison, and that's why she was losing her mind and doing all the things that she was doing. And so I was like, okay, so she's you're telling me that she has these deficiencies because she's black. That's what, okay, all right. So that was one of the things that really like stuck in my craw, as my grandma would say. um and then there was this idea, like all the things that I read about, and they're true, how it was for the title, like it was this revolutionary. Jane Eyre was, the character was pushing back and pushing for herself, and that I saw that and I was like, to me it doesn't read like the feminist sort of like heroic tale to me, because the only reason she didn't go through with the wedding is because she found out that there was another woman, and then she proceeds to have a breakdown about how that impacts her. But there's this woman being trapped upstairs, and when the woman is like, spoilers, like this book is however many decades old, and when that woman dies, it clears the way for Jane's path. So it's like, yes, it's her tale of heroism and fending for herself, but it's at the expense of this other woman who's been coded as, you know, non-white. So I was not crazy about that, like this idea of this great tale, but it's at the expense of another woman and a particular type of woman. And I know that like, there's, uh, talks about how Bertha was an enslaver and things like that. And it's like, okay, well, we can't, on the one hand, tout the greatness of this character over here and excuse everything else that's done because it's a product of its time. But over here, it's like, oh, well, this character who was created by the same person is held to a different standard. These aren't like actual people that we're talking about, like the founding fathers who could have, history would have been different if they had had different insights and different morals. These are fictional characters. So, yes, enslavement bad, but also this was a thing that was added on to this particular character. And I have qualms, and we can't ask Miss Bronte about why she did that way, but those are some of the qualms that I was like, yeah, we're gonna address that in this book.
I think this is one of the things. So if this is all coming as sort of news to people on the call, there is a conversation around Bertha's background and the extent to which she is being coded as non-white, and it's recurred, hasn't it, really recently with the discussion around Wuthering Heights, both of which, obviously classics, which it is totally possible to love and still view as problematic, and it is completely possible to study in school and absolutely hate. So the point is that what we're looking at here is that they've still got something within them that Elle, you found worth revisiting. So I think I'd just love to hear about, we had a question which was, why did you feel it was important to give Bertha her voice? And I think you've answered that, but let's think positively about your Bertha then. What did you want her to be like as a character?
I wanted her to sort of display this righteous fury that I wanted to feel because I had read other reviews while people were reading the original. This, for me, like there was this moment in I forget when this movie came out. I'm a bad nerd. When the first Wonder Woman movie came out, And for all, the issues that it had, and for who it did and didn't reach and wasn't for, I had an emotional reaction when she like walked across no man's land in the theater. And I was waiting for that moment while reading this book, and so I was like, okay, well, I will give Bertha a plethora of no man's land. Like, she has this is a war zone that she's pretty much in for her own sanity, for her own safety, for her own well-being. She's fighting these battles every day with these people, and has been for the better part of a year. So I wanted her to be able to be angry and to express that anger, whether it be, silent and seething or destruction, and for it to not paint her in a negative light, or for it, her to not be seen as less than or out of control because of it. So Bertha was a lot of fun because Jane also has a very good reason to be upset with Rochester, but I think the person who gets to be the most upset with with him, besides Adele, of course, is Bertha. So I wanted to explore giving a character like her, who looks like her, room to be mad on the page and not be stripped down or ridiculed for it.
Thank you. I think you've kind of touched on the answer to the question that 5 Acres High School have asked. Was there something about Jane Eyre in particular that you needed to put right? And also 5 Acres High School have asked, what made you choose Jane Eyre? So I guess you've mentioned some other classics that you've read. What made you choose that book to retell over some of the others?
Well, it's one of the ones that didn't bore me to tears while I was reading it. So you have to like get through the book in order to reimagine it. And it's just, that was, and after reading it, I didn't have like the visceral like dislike that I have for certain ones. Like, if I get asked or see someone else, because my sisters have kids who are entering into high school and they're starting to get their reading things. If one more person is demanded within my sphere of influence that they have to read To Kill a Mockingbird, I might flip a table. So Jane Eyre won in that I did enjoy my read of it. I wanted to find out what was happening next. Sometimes, a lot of the time, because I'm like, oh, what's going to happen? But also it's like, she can't be serious. Like, getting to the end to see what happens. So it was one of the ones that I felt could be reimagined without stripping away too much. Because, and I talk about this with another author, Bethany C. Morrow, historical fiction, a lot of it is fantasy because people wish away or will away the actual way that the world was at the time. Things don't get included, so forth and so on. People don't get included. So a lot of historical fiction and historical recountings are fantasy in the strictest of terms. So I wanted to be able to explore the themes of Jane Eyre, which I felt deserved to be looked at a little bit closer and with a little more nuance, the way that a lot of these literary giants and juggernauts that sort of prop up ideals that become movements later on, if that makes sense. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, there's so many brilliant points in that. And I mean, again, one of which is that you won't like every book you encounter. We know that. I'm afraid for those on the call, there are some you will have to study and write essays about appreciating them. But that doesn't mean they're your personal favorites. And it's, there's, I don't know if you're familiar, Elle, there's our partner Penguin for a previous book club do run a program called Lit in Colour, which is aimed at bringing more books by writers of colour and telling stories of people of colour and also other marginalised groups into schools and part of the English curriculum. So, I mean, I share your views on To Kill a Mockingbird, actually, which was an unfashionable opinion when I was a bit younger. But, there are loads of great classics out there. So are there, if this isn't a book you would have read for pleasure, there's an element of gritted teeth and I think I could do this better. Are there classics you would recommend? And if not, what do you recommend more broadly?
So, honestly, the classics that I feel I can recommend and not feel a way about it are going to be like your fairy tales. cultural touchstones that are literally fantastic, like Cinderella or Snow White, because it seems like somehow through humanity being the amazing thing that it is, Cinderella stories span cultures going back further than, much further than like social media allows us to share things in 30 minutes. Um, but there are like um, old vampire tales in other cultures around the world, and they have their version of, the princess that falls asleep, maybe because she was poisoned, or maybe because of a broken heart, maybe she's woken with a kiss or not. Um, so those are kind of the classics that I can recommend. Stuff like Alice in Wonderland, where it's a dream of, or alluded to be a dream. Maybe it's a dream, maybe it's a hallucination. That's what he was like when he was critiquing society in a way, like things that we wouldn't recognize as critiques because we don't have the context of that time. So no, I would recommend a lot of the books that are in conversation with classics, similar to mine, or I know Toni Morrison does a lot of not necessarily directly engaging, but taking a lot of those classic tropes and things and reinterpreting them. And it's mostly because of the way that I view classic literature is when, like, a lot of these books were decided, when it was decided who was going to be considered classic and when that era was going to be, it was during a period of time where a large fraction of the population wasn't even allowed to read and write. We couldn't participate in literature at all. It was illegal. So the classics don't count to me, because how are you going to tout this era of artistic creation as classical when people were literally jailed and beaten if they participated in the written word? Not to be a downer, but that's just how I view the subject all around. So I recommend more modern telling, because it's just a way to sort of get around that, um, which is the truth of our past, unfortunately.
Thank you for sharing that. And for people who are, wanting to write modern retellings of classic stories like you've done with this book, what advice would you give to young writers looking to do that? That question has come in from 5 Acres High School.
If you have a book and you have a, like I said, or like a visceral reaction to it, and it's not painful, like it's not going to cause any undue stress to mind that, just take care of yourself first. There are some books, like having read To Kill a Mockingbird and some others, I wouldn't want to read, because I don't want to have to go through reopening myself to that again and again and again, because you have to go back and look at things when you're trying to redo scenes, or make sure that you have like that you're being true to the spirit of the story. So if you have a reaction, it doesn't necessarily have to be a positive one, because negative reactions can produce positive fruit, like this book did. Then explore that, see what it is about that, maybe it's a certain scene or something that was left out. And if you change that in your mind, or change that on the page, if you write it out and something about it is like, yes, this feels better, isn't the right word, but it is 8 a.m. where I am, and my brain is still powering on. But if you find something that touches you emotionally, you can pull that out and examine it and potentially touch that in other people, because I promise you're not the only one who had that issue with that, or who felt that way about it, or who loved it that way. Like it doesn't have to be just negative. It can be very positive. I loved Alice in Wonderland and thought it would be cool to add other things I love, like vampire slaying. So find a book that gets a reaction out of you, one that you're like, I gotta talk to somebody about this, and see where it takes you.
Thank you. That sort of it leads nicely onto a question from Ling Hall School. How do you help yourself to be inspired or motivated when you've writer's block, or you've hit a mental wall? Some of which might come from the challenge of the book, I think.
Yes. I don't believe in writer's block. Um, and not that the function of writer's block doesn't happen. I don't believe in writer's block as the way as it has come to be seen as like this unknown, unchallengeable force that drops in on you and you have to figure out how to get rid of it. I don't have my notes in front of me, but I have a seminar that I teach on it about how writer's block is usually you trying to figure out how to tell the story to yourself before you can tell it to other people. So it can be a number of things. It could be that the scene is being told from the wrong perspective, or maybe it's the setting. If you pick the characters up and put them in another place and write the scene out and it flows better, that might be it. Honestly, sometimes, when was the last time you ate? When was the last time you had a glass of water? Like, being thirsty and hungry leads to writer's block because your brain is like, no, we're not going to do anything else until you feed and water us like a plant. So um it could be that you're trying to figure out why a character does or doesn't want to do or say a thing. Um, can you skip ahead of the scene that's blocking you and write what happens next? So there, I have a lot of tips to get around sort of this mental. I say I don't believe in writer's block, and then I say mental block, but this sort of mental barrier um, between yourself and getting the words done, because deadlines do exist. Like, I don't have homework anymore, but I still have times where I have to turn things in by. And those deadlines don't care if my muse is being cooperative, if I even have a muse, if I'm feeling creative. I have to sit down and do the work of putting the next word down and then the next word down. So trying to figure out um, not necessarily why, the words aren't coming, but maybe there's a physical thing. Maybe I need a nap. Um, maybe I'm telling this particular scene wrong. I'll ask the question what it is I'm trying to accomplish, not do I want them to kiss or do I want them to fight? What am I trying to accomplish? Is this a red herring for the plot? Is this, you know, revealing information? Is this moving the story along? Is this characterization? What is the point of what I'm trying to do? And if it doesn't serve the story, I need to be okay with skipping over it and come back to it later. That's sometimes that's what you have to do. You don't have to write in order. You can go and then come back. So those are a few things that I do when the words just don't refuse to come. And then lastly, if I don't force it, because I'll get down on myself and I'll put myself in a headspace where it's going to be even harder to work. If it's not working, I'll go take a walk. I'll go watch a show. I'll go play a video. I'll go engage in storytelling some other way that inspires me. And then I'll come back, because trying to force it is not, it's not going to work. So have grace for yourself on days when it's not working, because there have been weeks where no words have come. And then there have been days where 10,000 pour out in like 48 hours. So be gentle with yourself. You're still a writer, even if words aren't coming at the moment.
That's really helpful advice. Thank you, Elle. We've got loads of questions coming through, and if you want to submit any more questions, keep them coming. So 5 Acres have asked about the research process. So how do you go about making a story authentic? What research goes into that?
A lot. And the funny thing is that before I did this, people would ask, is there, a genre or a story or anything that you would never write? And I said, I would never write a historical because research. And that was my least favorite thing about writing when I was in school, was having to do research. Because I get easily distracted and go off onto so many rabbit holes. Um, so for this one, like, just a funny story, like, at this point I now know more about Victorian bathrooms and toilets than I ever thought would be needed for somebody who doesn't deal with that in like an actual historical or teaching sense. But it was enough for me to decide, yeah, no. And some of my books, like, the character is running late and having to shower, or doing whatever routine in the mirror. I'm like, we're just gonna leave that area of the house alone because it's too long and too involved. So things like that, which oddly help shape the story. Nothing happens anywhere near people getting ready, with the exception of like, getting ready for a fancy party. Because that's a thing that I like doing in books where I get to send people to balls. So um, I did not anticipate how much research goes into it and how much research it is I just need to have to be able to correctly portray what's going on. 95% of what I researched doesn't show up in the book, but it's so it can be believable. Um, and that's with anything. It's you need to know the rules so you can break them, so you know where the guardrails are. So even if the lights are off, you won't go too far outside of, trying to. It's not pitch or strike, sports people, but bowl or strike. So I'll never say I won't ever write a particular genre again. I'm not gonna fall for that. Fate's funny. But yeah, I walked away with an acute knowledge of Victorian toilets. That is what I've accumulated.
That's a great point. I mean, there is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice from the maid's point of view that opens with about a line about how Elizabeth Bennet wouldn't do so much walking in the mud if she had to wash her own skirts afterwards, which I think is a similar perspective on the pre-plumbing era. You've answered there also 5 Acres. Another question from 5 Acres about will your next book be a classic that needs a modern revamp? So it sounds like ideally not, but certainly what will your next book be about is a question from the school.
Well, technically it hasn't been announced yet, so I can't super duper talk about it, but it kind of does the same thing that my Alice in Wonderland book does, where it takes not necessarily a classic, but a classic myth and sort of rejiggers it to fit into a more modern setting. It's one of those things where, like with me and Alice in Wonderland, like, this is really cool. Other people should like see how cool this is. This is what I think is so cool about it. So it's another tale that I was like, I'm really into this, and was as a kid, and am really excited to bring that story to fruition so that readers can sort of enjoy it in the same light that I always imagined it in history with like superpowers.
That's so exciting. Thank you. We'll keep an eye on your social media for that announcement. All right. You're also a poet and you've written fantasy books. Do you have a favorite genre or media for storytelling? What do you like about them? And do you have any recommendations as well?
I don't have a favorite as in I like it more than the others. I do have a favorite for how I'm feeling in the moment. Forgive me if you hear meowing in the background. My cat is upset that he is not allowed in the office at this time, and I am clearly talking to other people. I cannot have my attention elsewhere but him. He's so upset. But like, I engage in storytelling across all mediums, video games, television shows, movies, comic books, graphic novels, because each one can teach you how to better strengthen certain creative muscles. It adds to your writer's toolbox. Like, I do comics, and that's because I don't draw them. I don't have the talent for it. I perhaps could have pursued that at one point in time, but I don't have the patience. People who can draw sorcery, I think it's amazing that you're able to like move a stick across the paper and come out with it. Like, I think it's brilliant. And the pictures in comics do most of the narrative heavy lifting, where in prose, it would be the words between the dialogue. For me, writing comics, I have to strengthen my dialogue because I have to tell the entire story using only dialogue. And I have to do it in a way that the artist can then be like, oh yeah, okay, I see what you're going for here, and then put it into a picture that makes sense and flows through. Because comics, like, you have to jump from somebody being in the shower to them running down the stairs and out the door, and you have to put together what happened in between without the prose to tell you that. So comics work your brain a little bit differently. So now my dialogue is different, I think. There's a very clear difference in the way that I approach dialogue in the books from before I started writing comics to the ones that came after I started writing comics. Short stories as well, because you have to do an entire 3-act structure in like 3,000 words. Before it's a book, it's like 95,000 words. So it just helps you tighten and learn how to get to the meat of what you like. You edit a little bit better as you go along once you get some experience under your belt and you start seeing these things and adjusting. Um, so you do it, it helps you grow. So I don't have a favorite one. Some days I'm feeling video game-ish. Some days I can't engage with a movie because it's going to take too long and my attention span just isn't there. Some days it's anime because I want to watch people do incredible things and live action isn't just it's not there yet. Sorry, House of Mouse and MCU. Um, but there's no favorites. I like them all. I rambled again. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely not. It's we've got a couple of questions about becoming and being an author. So I mean, let's start with what's great about it and what are the challenges.
Oh, well, what's great about it is stuff like today where I get to come and talk about the books, talk about the process, talk to my audience, which for this book, are uh, teen readers, talk about the things that I love, which are storytelling, and even some of the things I'm not crazy about in some of the stories, but it still all counts as good to me because I'm doing what I love, which is engaging in story. Um, I got so a little bit of background is I've always told stories. I you believe my father and my grandma, I was reading books at 2 years old. I can't remember back that far, so I can neither confirm nor deny, but apparently there's old VHS footage of me reading this book word for word when I was super duper young. So I've always loved engaging in storytelling and loving stories. I've loved fantasy and anime and things from a young age, but I started getting older and noticing, a lot of the genres that I love didn't necessarily love me back. We weren't allowed, and when I say we, I mean Black people, we weren't allowed in these spaces, in these places. It made it inauthentic for us to simply exist. It's like we weren't like we weren't invented until like the 1600s. So no, they're not running around in like medieval type things. And then that's the isms of the times aside. I started noticing this, and I couldn't articulate it as a kid why it bothered me. But then I grew up, and I started writing. But then in my freshman year, so my first year of high school, I was 14 years old. I would finish my work early, and this bothered my English teacher because I would work on my other stuff. She wouldn't let me skip ahead to do, future things. I guess she just wanted me to sit at my desk and do nothing. So I would work on my own stories after finishing the course. And at one point, I got in trouble for it. And she tells my parents writing is a distraction for Leatrice and she should stop. And this was before, you could get on social media and talk about how schools are mistreating, certain marginalized communities. And so my parents were very supportive. They're like, just keep your head down, get through the class. You don't need this smoke from her. She's got her own issues. Don't take that on yourself. But I didn't write again until college. Like somebody in a position of authority had that much of an impact that I didn't write again until my early 20s. So then a little phenomenon named Twilight happened. And I love vampires. So this is no shake. We had this conversation earlier. Not everybody likes every book. Twilight was not for me. It was not. It's for millions of other people, so it's okay that it's not for me. So tried to read it, couldn't get into it. No big deal. The movies happen. So we go to the movie. And again, if you love, please continue to love it. It did what it did. It's a phenomenon for a reason, right? Don't be ashamed of loving this. Don't let anybody else shame you for loving it, myself included. That's not the intent. But I'm watching the movie and I'm like, well, if she can do it, I can do it. Like, and that's literally how I was like, you know what, let me give this an actual attempt. Let me try and engage in storytelling with the the purpose of being published, because I'm looking at these genres that I love that are not loving me back, and my sisters are having kids that are falling in love with these exact same things, Batman and Star Wars and Star Trek, and the communities are very gatekeepy, anime, all these things. So I was like, there will be at least one book with a little Black kid on it that does these things that I love, so nobody can tell my babies that they're not allowed to engage in these types of stories. So that's kind of how I got started, was um, one part spite, one part righteous fury, and one part, well, if that can be done, I think I can do it as well.
And did you ever consider any other career paths? So what would you be if you weren't a writer?
I actually went to school to make video games. I was in the industry for a hot minute. The video game culture is a lot better today than it was 20 years ago. But it was incredibly toxic, and I am not a super patient person. So for the sake of not, telling people about themselves in and out of every day, I was like, let me pursue a different path. So I was in the process of going to school for video games and, creating potential hypothetical plots for games, when I forget who it was, but someone was like, you're pretty good at this. And I was like, you know what? I mean, yeah. I mean, at first I was like, no, I'm not. But after a while, I was like, I can at least try. I won't, if I don't try, I'll know I'll regret it.
Well, I think you've answered pretty comprehensively there a question we've had from 5 Acres, which was, did you always know you wanted to be a writer? And I'm sure we're all sorry that you had that negative experience in school. And it's great that you've managed to sort of to persevere past it. So just to think about you've made the decision to be an author. What was the journey to being published and becoming an author?
Oh, well, first of all, I'm going to say finish the book. If you have a book idea, if you have a story idea, you will be ahead of 90% of the people, because everybody has a book in them, according to, people. It's like, oh, I always wanted to write a book, or I always had a story idea. Everybody has a story idea. It's the execution of putting the story out, getting it out of your head and making it cohesive and coherent on the page for somebody else to then ingest. So finish the book, because nothing else can happen after that. We can daydream about it, we can think about it, we can consider it, we can make the plans, but without the book, none of it comes to fruition. So I always tell people, there's all sorts of writing advice and encouragement. Simplest for me is keep going. That's literally the biggest difference between a lot of people who do end up doing this, both traditionally and indie wise. Is keep going. If you stop, then there is no book, and we need books from this generation coming up. We need that perspective, just as we need all perspectives as they come into the zeitgeist. So for me, it was finishing a first draft, which was horrible. Oh, this first draft was so bad. This wasn't the first time I had attempted writing a book. I had tried when I was like 11 or 12, and I got pretty far. She's pretty thick. My grandma still has it at her house somewhere. But this is the first time I finished it. I could go back and edit it. And as I'm editing it, I'm researching agents and things. And this was in like circa 2008, 2009. This was a while ago. And this took a process of about a decade. So I'm not going to go through everything, but I wrote a book, I edited it, I went and found other people who like reading what I read and who had the goal of being writers. So we would exchange work, we critiqued each other. I read books about storytelling. I remembered certain things about stories that I loved. I kept notes. When I would read, I would annotate books, like what made me put a book down, what made me keep reading at 3 a.m. when I knew I had a test in the morning, bad decisions. And then I started the process of looking for an agent. And this is all sounds like simply like the process of looking for an agent. That's a whole nother 15 minutes in and of itself, but I'm not going, can't do that. And I queried, and in the process wrote 3 other books. That's how long it took. Um, I stopped counting my query rejections at 250, and they kept coming. And then people would always ask, how did you keep going? Because I was always working on something else. I always divorced myself mentally, not from caring about a book, but from caring about it. But like I made the new book my favorite, so that if a no came in on the old book, I wasn't as devastated. And I was determined that it was going to happen. So when a no came in, I was like, that's a reason. From like, if they didn't say, oh, the characters are weak, or oh, the plot doesn't make sense. If they were like, it wasn't for me, I'm like, cool. I would send out another query. Like every no would bring me closer to my yes. That's how I viewed it. And I say all that to say that the agent who said yes had only been an agent for 6 months before she got my book. If I had stopped at any point before that 6 months, the years leading up to it, I would not have found the person who then found the editor, who also had just started working at that publishing house within about 6 months. So the people who were going to be crucial to my very first debut getting out there weren't even in position when I first started writing. So you got to keep a big picture. Like, I know it's easy to get bogged down in, oh, the words aren't coming today, or oh, I got another rejection today, or oh, I'm not feeling the story. But this just iterates my keep going. Keep going. That's the only way you're going to get there, is if you don't stop. Your path is going to look different. My path looks different for each book, let alone, from each author. So keep going is all of the advice that I that's the best advice I could have gotten, did get, and that I hope to impart, is to just don't stop.
That's really great advice. Thank you. And we usually ask our speakers at the end of a call, what advice do you have for young people around success? So I think that was really helpful. Thank you. Very conscious of the time. We've only got a couple minutes left, but there were 2 questions from 5 Acres High School left. Do you use your own life experiences to add to your writer's toolbox? And how long specifically did it take to write this book, Escaping Mr. Rochester?
So I can't really say how long it's. I'm going to say anywhere between 12 to 18 months from concept to here's a book now ready to go on shelves. It took longer than that because the pandemic happened and everything got pushed back. But I remember being approached about the book and the concept, and starting to have the conversation in 2019. And the only reason I remember that it was 2019 is because I remember answering emails and then getting up and going and watching Endgame. Like that's how I remember where that book started. I think a first draft was ready. I want to say end of 2020, beginning of 2021, because I had other stuff that I had to finish that was contracted before I even got started on this. So it for me, depending on the book, it can take anywhere from a year to 2 years for it to go from solid idea and nothing on the page to this is now ready to sell. And I'm not the only one working on it. There's a team, there's editors, there's copy editors, there's different agent editors with different names that do different things. So when you're writing and you're like, oh my God, this sucks, you're comparing it to a finished product that a whole team went into making. So that's why I try not to read a whole lot while I'm drafting. And the second, what was the second one? Sorry. Oh, my own experience. I do. Because I like to write about the truth and what actually happens in the world and how certain characters experience it. Like in my Alice in Wonderland retelling, she talks about how, in these books and stuff, like Buffy would carry her stake around in her back pocket. She's like, I'm a Black girl in downtown Atlanta. I can't carry no sharp implement around in my back pocket, or no, just the risk alone, things like that. So my experience in, certain areas, and I have a lot of privilege because I'm very light skinned. But my people in my family are not. Like, my sisters are much darker than me, and we'll go into a department store and she'll get followed and I won't. If I go by myself, I'll get followed by, loss prevention. But if loss prevention has to choose who they're going to mistrust, they're going to mistrust my sister over me. So experiences like that, and just seeing how the world does react to people for something they can't help, that shouldn't, be judged about their character, which is their skin tone. Seeing that does happen, no matter how much people want to pretend that it doesn't, does color how I tell stories.
Thank you. What a powerful note to end on. It's so unfortunate that we've not got any more time for today, because I'm sure there would be more questions, and we would love to spend more time with you and hear more about your writing and your experiences and your career. But thank you so much for taking all this time to speak to our students today and to answer their questions. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the call.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Elle, and thanks to everyone for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the Q&A and found it really valuable. A feedback form will be shared with you soon via email, so we'd really appreciate both students and school staff completed this. And we hope to see you at our other sessions for National Teen Book Club at Jane Eyre, which are all on screen now. Please head to our National Teen Book Club webpage if you need to register for any more sessions. You can also find more broadcasts on the Speakers for Schools website, and we'll be sharing Discover Creative Careers event information in our upcoming post-session email too. There's loads to get involved with, including our Faber publishing panel. A reminder about that. So that's on the 7th of November. We're going to be hearing from experts across different departments, learning about their jobs at Faber. Hopefully you'll join us then, and we'll see you next time for National Teen Book Club. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.